Virginians have always stood at the crossroads of the fight for freedom. It is a battle in which we all reap the benefits. World War II was the defining event of the 20th century. It involved 60 countries. Over 57 million people were killed. The nuclear age was launched, and the United States emerged as the world's most powerful nation. World War II was fought in two major theaters of operation: the North African, Mideastern, and European theater, and to the Far East, the Asiatic Pacific theater. The Asiatic Pacific area was a tug-of-war between the United States and its allies and Japan. There were two major fronts: the Pacific Island conflicts, and to the west, the China-Burma-India front. The objectives of the China-Burma-India, or CBI effort, were to divert Japanese resources from the Pacific Islands conflict, keep China in the war, build supply lines to China, and open air bases for a possible attack on Japan. Often known as the Forgotten War, some of World War II's most renowned lore came from the CBI: Merrill's Marauders, the Flying Tigers, the Bridge over the River Kwai, and Flying the Hump.
On December the 7th, 1941, someplace called Pearl Harbor had been bombed by the Japanese. And we couldn't believe it. Where's Pearl Harbor? What's this all about, you know? And then suddenly we realized that we were at war. We just felt the need to do what had to be done, that was all.
Pearl Harbor was bombed, and then we were in the Army for the duration of the war.
And after Pearl Harbor, everybody became chauvinistic, very patriotic. They wanted to serve their country. And of course, we as nurses wanted to serve the country. So I volunteered, I was selected, and I became a reserve officer for 1 week. The Army needed me so badly.
I was working in a defense plant, and of course had a deferment. And if everybody had as much trouble getting into service as I did, there would have been no war.
The draft was supposed to have started October the 12th, 1940. And I knew my name might come up for the draft, and so I figured I would rather fly than walk, and so I joined the Army Air Corps.
It was a wonderful time to be an American, that it was great to be young, and we would not have wanted to be anywhere else except in uniform at that time.
Camp Carson was to train in the mountainous region of the Rockies to let us know what it's all about. And that's where we got a great deal of our training for the type of warfare in Burma.
And I took a test with the captain who was in charge of the instructions. He said, "What do you want to do?" And I told him that I understood that a new airplane called the B-29 was coming out. And I just wondered if I could get into that. And lo and behold, when my orders were cut, I was sent to Lincoln, Nebraska for reassignment as a co-pilot in the B-29.
I departed San Francisco on the magnificent Asiatic steamliner, the Coolidge. We went first class, we had liveried waiters, we had the finest food in the world. We had only 2 meals a day because we had thousands of troops to feed, and so the facilities would not allow 3 meals a day.
We went to Lincoln, Nebraska, spent a night. That was about a little over 9-hour flight, and from there up to Gander, and we weathered in up there for a couple of weeks, and finally we got off and went into the Azores, and that was the first really trip we had over the water. And that was almost a 10-hour trip to hit a little island out in the Atlantic Ocean, and I found out my navigator was the best one in the world. We went down like going across when we were in Cairo. We went out and flew one day there, and we didn't buzz. We weren't allowed to buzz, but we went real low and went over the Sphinx and the pyramids and got a real close-up look at them.
And we crossed over India in a narrow gauge railroad, 10 days it took us. Then we went on the Brahmaputra River, and from there with trains and then trucks, and finally we got 1,000 miles above Calcutta.
We were warned about various things. That we warned about the krite. The krite is a little snake, part of the cobra family, but so deadly that if you are bitten by a krite, let's say the krite strikes at your ankle or whatever, that you will be dead before you hit the ground.
Several months there, maybe 4 months, and I had hepatitis. So I had to be rushed to the hospital, turned yellow and couldn't eat and all this. So I stayed in the hospital almost a month there.
It's just hard for a Richmond boy who'd never been much further side of the state of Virginia, let alone outside of the country, to see the conditions that prevailed in India at that time. We were there when Merrill's Marauders came back from Missional, and we saw the condition of those people. My friend George Rose was one of them. They really had a rough time. Dysentery, malaria, the whole bit. But this was before we ever ran into the Japs.
Stilwell said the last word on the campaign.
We got run out of Burma, and it's humiliating as hell. I think we ought to find out what caused it, go back and retake the place.
I was sent over to India to fly the hump between India and China. And so I spent the next year over there doing that job. We were supplying the first to Flying Tigers because the only way they had of getting all their needs in, ammunition, bombs, gasoline, food, was to fly it in, because the Japanese had surrounded China, and they were able to get it in by truck, but the Japanese then cut the Lido Road and the Burma Road, and so the only thing left was to fly it in. And we lost an average of 3 airplanes every day.
We were at the beginning of the Lido Road, and the Lido Road, as you may well know, was the road that was being built by General Stilwell and his troops from India through Burma to China, so that would make a road for us to get to the Japanese.
And what we do, we'd harass them as much as we could and ambush them and just keep them stirred up. Hit them and then disappear. And hit them and ambush them again, see? And that's the way they done all the way down the road. Well, I said, I always made up my mind. I said, they may kill me, but I'm gonna be the most expensive damn GI they ever killed. Well, I'm gonna try to take as many of them with me as I could, and I did too.
So we made the third run, and we got about 2/3 of the way down the bomb run, and things got real rough because the plane started bouncing and the flak was heavy, and they were right at our level, and they had us zeroed in. I just looked out, and my number 2 man was sitting in there right where he was supposed to be, and we felt this concussion and the shaking of the airplane, and I glanced over and leaned up and glanced over in front of the co-pilot, and there was nothing but a big black cloud of smoke where my number 2 man had been. I don't know whether he got it right directly into Bombay or what, but we were on the bomb run, and they took him out completely, lost the whole crew, airplane and everything. But this was life. This is the way you lived. And as I told my wife years later, I said, other than being married to her, and I said, no offense, man, I said, but the greatest time of my life was when I was flying combat. I enjoyed it.
You know, you always have one wise guy that says, I want to see some action, I've been getting ready for it. goes in, the crewman says, the bombers are 6 minutes away. The slit trenches are right out there. Go get in one fast. 6 minutes. They said there was 65 bombers and 200 fighters.
I was on duty the night we decoded a message which told us about the dropping of the atomic bomb.
One of the fellows at the table says, "Did you hear about what happened today?" I said, "No, what are you talking about?" He said, "We dropped an atomic bomb on Japan, but it's supposed to kill 100,000 people." I said, "Well, in that case, this war's going to be over in less than 30 days, I believe." And it was.
I went into service when I was 18 years old. I was commissioned when I was 19. I sold at a B-24 when I was 19. And I was flying combat leading squadron in the group at the age of 20. War was over before I reached 22 years old and was home.
But you know, when something happens like that and you anticipate it so long, you really don't know how to take it. It's like one part of your life is quit. Mm-hmm. And then you say, well, now what?
We came into Miami, Florida. That's where we were supposed to deliver the airplane. And the first thing we wanted was milk. We hadn't seen milk in over a year. And I think we almost made ourselves sick drinking milk.
Well, I got home on the 9th day of January of '45. The family had left all of the decorations for Christmas and the Christmas trees, and it was great.
I called my fiance here in Richmond, and she was at a friend's house. And of course, it was wintertime then, and her friend told her, she says, after you called, we had to put her out on the porch to cool off. We had a wonderful life together, though.
This country was saved, you know, from the Nazis and from the Japanese. We wouldn't be what we are today. And a lot of men gave their lives and suffered. That's so we can enjoy what we're enjoying today, the prosperity, good food and a home to live in. And you should never forget that.
And really, that's what it's all about. Being reasonable, sensible, and not listen to some fanatic. Take it with a grain of salt and use your own judgment. Don't follow them, follow your own heart.
This voice came up and he said, "Gentlemen," he says, "I don't mean to interrupt you." He says, "I have really learned a whole lot about World War II." And went on, and he was very nice. And he says, "I don't know how to thank you." He says, "I really don't." He says, "I don't know how to thank you." And I just hit the mic button and I said, "Young fella, you just did. It's the greatest thanks we could have. You said thank you."